Nolisa stood at the edge of the room, holding a tray of homemade samosas. The party buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. "Just stay in the kitchen and serve, please," Menzies had whispered earlier, adjusting his tie. She smiled. He didn't know the keynote speaker they were about to announce was her. Nolisa stood quietly in their kitchen, carefully placing the last batch of samosas on a silver tray. She had cooked all morning, not because she had to, but because she wanted to support her husband, Menzies. It was his big office party, and she thought showing up with homemade food would make him proud. But the moment they arrived at the venue, Menzies pulled her aside. "Just stay in the kitchen area, okay? Don't try to join the conversations. This is a professional event," he whispered firmly, straightening his tie. Nolisa blinked, surprised. Her heart sank a little, but she smiled and nodded. She didn't want to argue or make a scene. She had heard this tone before, like she was just someone to stand behind, not beside him. As people laughed and chatted around her, she quietly placed the snacks on the table and moved back into the corner. Nobody knew she was the one who made them. Nobody even looked her way. Menzies walked proudly among his co-workers, shaking hands and joking loudly. Every now and then, he would glance toward Nolisa, checking to make sure she was behaving. She stood still, her hands folded, watching the room. Inside, her heart was strong and calm. She had played this quiet role many times before. She had smiled through moments where she should have spoken. But tonight was different, because this time, she wasn't staying quiet out of fear or weakness. She had agreed to play her part one last time. After tonight, there would be no more corners, no more trays, and no more silence. She wasn't just someone's wife. She was more than even Menzies had ever known. And soon, everyone in that room, including him, would find out exactly who she really was. Menzies stood in the middle of a small group at the office party, laughing loudly and talking about how fast M&N Innovations was growing. "We're the next big thing in tech," he said proudly, sipping his drink. "Our CEO is a genius. Whoever this N person is, they really know how to run things." The people around him nodded, impressed. Menzies continued, "Must be some quiet investor hiding in the background. Probably a rich old guy who doesn't like the spotlight." Not far away, Nolisa heard every word. She stood near the food table, pretending to adjust the napkins. Her face was calm, but inside, she felt a mix of sadness and strength. She looked at her husband and thought, "You've been in this company for over a year, and you never once asked who and was." He never imagined that the N in M&N Innovations could stand for her. He just assumed, like he always did. When they started the company, Nolisa and her best friend Amale had agreed to keep their names hidden. They wanted the work to speak for itself, not their faces or gender. So they used initials, M for Amale's middle name and N for Nolisa. Even their staff didn't know who the real CEO was. They worked quietly from behind the scenes, building something powerful, something real. Menzies only saw what he wanted to see, a rising company with brilliant leadership, but he never looked deeper, not at the people behind the success, not at his own wife. Every evening, Nolisa worked late into the night after Menzies had gone to bed. She took business calls in the bathroom, signed deals in secret, and answered emails from a hidden office at home. She had built half of the company he was bragging about, and yet he never noticed. He was too busy shining in the spotlight to realize who had built the stage, too busy speaking to ever listen. Nolisa watched him with tired eyes, not angry, just clear. He didn't know, but he was about to. Tonight, the truth would walk into the room, and he would finally see the name behind the empire. Not some silent investor, not a stranger, but the very woman he told to stay near the kitchen. The office party was in full swing. People were laughing, eating, and talking about work, money, and the future. But then, something shifted. A quiet whisper started to pass from one group to another, and in just a few minutes, the whole room was buzzing. "Did you hear? The CEO of M&N Innovations might be coming tonight," someone said near the drinks table. Another replied, "The real CEO, the one nobody's ever seen." Heads turned, eyes lit up. Everyone became curious. Mr. Dube, the company's top boss, stood near a group of executives with a proud smile on his face. "We're close to something big," he said, holding a glass of juice. "If tonight goes well, M&N Innovations might acquire our division. Imagine what that means for our future." The CEO is expected to arrive later tonight. His voice was calm but filled with excitement. Menzies' eyes widened. He stepped closer to listen. He had always dreamed of climbing higher in his job, and now the chance was right in front of him. He nudged his co-workers and joked, "This CEO hiding behind initials? What kind of genius doesn't show their face?" The group laughed with him. "Maybe it's someone scared to speak in public," he added, chuckling again. Nolisa stood just a few feet away. She heard every word. She didn't react right away, just smiled quietly to herself. Her husband had no idea who he was joking about. She looked at Mr. Dube, who was now shaking hands and whispering with a few board members. They were excited, nervous even, about the CEO's arrival. And all along, that person had been standing in the room the entire time, next to the food table, watching everything unfold. Menzies, still full of himself, told another group, "Watch, this so-called genius will probably walk in wearing sunglasses and acting like royalty." He laughed loudly. "Let's see if they can actually hold a conversation." Nolisa looked over at Amale, who stood across the room, giving her a small nod. It was time, but before she moved, she let out a soft chuckle, just loud enough for herself. The kind of laugh that carries quiet power. A laugh that said, "You have no idea what's coming." The CEO that everyone wanted to meet was not hiding. She was simply waiting, watching, listening, and soon she would speak. 2 years ago, Nolisa sat at a small wooden desk in a tiny rented office with her best friend, Amale. They had no big budget, no team, and no support, but they had an idea, a vision, and determination. As they filled out the final paperwork to launch their tech startup, there was one small but important choice to make. What names to put as founders? Nolisa paused. She thought about her husband, Menzies. She had shared ideas with him before, told him about her dreams of building a company. But he never really listened. He would smile, nod, and then change the subject. Sometimes he would even say, "Business isn't for women like you. You're too soft, too kind. Just focus on home." Those words had stayed in her mind, not as pain, but as fuel. So when it was time to sign the papers, she didn't write her full name. She simply wrote N.L. Zuma. No full name, no title, just clean, strong initials. She wasn't hiding. She was protecting her space. She wanted to build something without being questioned, without being doubted, without being dragged down by someone who didn't believe in her. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was power. In the months that followed, Nolisa worked harder than she ever had. While Menzies thought she was just freelancing or doing little projects from home, she was leading a growing business behind the scenes. She and Amale handled clients, built apps, pitched to investors, and slowly turned their small startup into a rising star in the tech world. Menzies never once asked what she was really working on. He didn't care. He assumed her life stayed in the kitchen and the living room. So Nolisa let him believe that. Every night when he went to sleep, she stayed up answering emails. Every weekend when he relaxed, she held online meetings. She never corrected him when he talked about how real CEOs behaved. She just smiled and let him talk. Now 2 years later, standing quietly at his office party, Nolisa thought back to that moment, the day she signed her name with only initials. It wasn't fear that made her do it. It was the freedom to rise without noise, to build without being held back. Menzies had no idea that while he was ignoring her dreams, she was building an empire right beside him. And tonight, that silence was about to speak louder than anything he had ever heard. Menzies stood confidently near the group of top executives, his suit neatly pressed, his smile wide. He had been waiting for this moment all evening, the chance to introduce himself to Mr. Dube, his company's highest boss. He believed that if he made a good impression tonight, he might get noticed, maybe even promoted. As he straightened his jacket, he turned to Nolisa, who stood quietly beside the snacks table. "Just wave and smile when they look over here," he whispered to her, like she was just a decoration. She nodded without saying a word. Menzies stepped forward as Mr. Dube and 2 other senior executives approached. "Good evening, sir," Menzies said eagerly, offering his hand. "I'm Menzies Makize from the marketing division. I've been following M&N Innovations for months now. It's a dream to meet the CEO someday." His voice was loud, trying to be impressive. The executive smiled politely, but said nothing. Then something unexpected happened. Mr. Dube didn't shake Menzies' hand. He looked past him. His eyes were searching, and then he saw her. Nolisa, standing still, calm, her hands lightly resting in front of her. Without hesitation, Mr. Doob walked straight towards her. Everyone around turned to see what was happening. He stopped in front of her and smiled warmly. "We've been waiting for you," he said clearly. "CEO-NL Zuma." The room went silent. Menzie froze in place, his mouth slightly open, confusion filling his face. His eyes darted between Mr. Doob and Nolisa. "CEO," he whispered, almost choking on the word. "Her?" But Nolisa didn't look shocked. She simply smiled, lifted her chin, and nodded gently. "Good evening," she said in a calm voice, reaching out to shake Mr. Doob's hand. Mr. Doob turned to the others and added, "This is the brilliant mind behind M&N Innovations, the one who's been transforming the industry quietly but powerfully. We are honored to have her here." Gasps and surprised whispers filled the room. People who had walked past Nolisa all night without noticing her were now staring. Some clapped slowly, others just looked stunned. Menzie stood there like a statue, his pride suddenly shrinking. He had kept his wife by the snack table, thinking she didn't belong in big conversations. But all along, she had been the very person everyone was there to meet. She didn't need an invitation to the table. She had already built the table. While Menzie had tried to show off, Nolisa had stayed silent, not because she was small, but because she was already sitting on a throne he couldn't see. And now, the world was seeing it. Menzie stood frozen. His face slowly turned pale as Mr. Doob's words echoed in his ears. "We've been waiting for you, CEO NL Zuma." He couldn't believe it. He blinked, trying to understand what had just happened. The same woman he told to stay by the snacks. The woman he asked to just wave and smile. The same woman he laughed at for dreaming too big was the one everyone was waiting for. His heart beat faster. His mouth was slightly open, but no words came out. His thoughts were racing, trying to catch up with the truth. The CEO he had joked about all night. The mysterious investor he had wanted to impress. The genius he had assumed was some man in a suit. It was Nolisa, his wife. The room was now filled with whispers and surprised faces. People who hadn't even looked at Nolisa before were now staring with wide eyes. A few guests even stepped back, giving her space, as if realizing they had missed something important. Amale stood at a distance, smiling proudly, knowing this moment was always coming. But Nolisa didn't look shaken. She didn't look angry either. She stood tall, calm and steady, like someone who had waited for this moment with quiet strength. She took one small step forward and looked around the room. Then, in a clear, confident voice, she said, "Good evening, colleagues." It was simple. No loud tone, no dramatic pause. But the way she said it, with power and peace, made the entire room go still. People stopped moving. All eyes were on her. Menzie felt like the floor beneath him had cracked. Just minutes ago, he was laughing with co-workers, trying to sound smart, saying, "No genius hides behind initials." Now, he couldn't even look Nolisa in the eyes. He had mocked her without knowing it, doubted her, controlled her. And now, in front of everyone, the truth had arrived like thunder. But Nolisa didn't try to embarrass him. She didn't even look at him. She kept her focus on the crowd, the people who had gathered, the ones who were finally seeing her for who she truly was. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence spoke louder than any words could. This was her moment, a moment earned through quiet nights, hard work, and patience. While the room spun with surprise and confusion, she stood still, strong, fearless, and in control. And Menzie, he could only watch. The room was completely quiet as Nolisa walked toward the front. Everyone stepped aside to let her pass. Even those who didn't know who she was a few minutes ago now couldn't take their eyes off her. She moved with calm and confidence, not rushed, not nervous. When she reached the stage, she took a deep breath, looked around at the sea of surprised faces, and smiled. "Thank you for having me," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I'm NL Zuma, co-founder and CEO of M&N Innovations." The silence grew deeper. Even the air felt still. "I believe true innovation doesn't come from noise or power," she said. "It comes from listening, learning, and lifting others as we rise. In our company, we don't just build technology, we build trust. We create space for fresh ideas and quiet voices, because real progress happens when everyone is allowed to speak, and everyone is treated with dignity." Her words were simple, no fancy language, no dramatic tone, But every sentence landed like truth that had been waiting to be heard. She continued, "Some people think leadership looks a certain way, loud, bold, seen. But I've learned something else. Leadership is sometimes quiet. It's staying focused when no one claps for you. It's showing up when no one sees you. And it's choosing respect. Every time." She paused and looked around the room. She never once said Menzies' name. She never pointed fingers. But her message was clear. The way she had been overlooked, pushed aside, and underestimated wasn't a mistake. It was the lesson. The silence broke with slow, steady applause. Then more and more. The room filled with claps and cheers. Some stood. Others wiped tears. Her words had reached people's hearts. They didn't just hear her. They felt her. Menzies stood at the back, still frozen. His hands finally began to move, slowly clapping. But he was too late. Everyone around him had already stood up. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He knew. He had missed something big, not just tonight, but for years. Nolisa didn't look at him. She simply bowed her head gently and stepped down. Her speech was done. Her voice had been heard, and nothing in that room would ever be the same again. The room was still buzzing with excitement after Nolisa's speech. People surrounded her from every side, shaking her hand, asking questions, and praising her words. Some said they were inspired. Others said they had never seen a leader speak with such grace and truth. It was clear. Nolisa had won the room without trying to. She had spoken from her heart, and now everyone wanted a piece of her time. Menzies stood in a quiet corner, his back pressed against the wall. He watched it all unfold with a tight chest and shaky hands. Moments ago, he thought this party was about him showing off. Now, it was her moment, and he wasn't even part of it. He had been left behind, not by accident, but by his own actions. He took a step forward, hoping to catch her eye, maybe say something, anything, an apology, a joke, a compliment. But before he could get close, Nolisa turned and walked in the opposite direction, not in anger, but with purpose. She walked straight toward Amale, her best friend and co-founder, who stood at the side smiling proudly. The two women hugged tightly, both of them knowing what this moment meant. It wasn't just success, it was freedom. It was finally being seen. Menzies stood there, watching, his hand still half raised in the air. It was clear now. He wasn't the center of her world anymore. Maybe he never really was. Nolisa leaned closer to Amale and whispered something only her friend could hear. He can help himself from now on. It was short, software, but it carried the weight of everything she had been through. The years of being ignored, the countless times she had supported Menzies while he looked the other way, the silence she had lived in so he could feel important. But now, everything had changed. She had found her voice. She had claimed her space, and she no longer felt the need to shrink herself for anyone, not even her husband. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't turn to look back. She had said what needed to be said with her actions. As more guests came to talk to her and ask for pictures, Menzies slowly backed away. For the first time, he realized that the woman he thought was just his quiet, obedient wife was the real leader all along. And now, she didn't need him to stand beside her. She had already walked past him. The next morning, the house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. Menzies sat at the kitchen table, staring into his cup of cold tea. His phone was filled with unread messages, some from co-workers, some from friends, all talking about what happened at the party. His name had barely come up. Everyone was talking about her, Nolisa, the mysterious CEO, the woman no one had noticed, now impossible to ignore. At work, things didn't go any better. The excitement over M&N innovations had turned into new decisions. Mr. Doob called Menzies into his office and told him clearly, "You will step down from your current role. We need people who see potential, not ignore it." Menzies left the office without saying a word. His pride had taken a hard hit. Meanwhile, Nolisa walked into a different kind of office, a lawyer's office, not to end her marriage, but to protect what she had built. She didn't file for divorce. She filed for full control over their shared assets, including parts of their finances Menzies never bothered to understand. It was time to stop sharing what he had never helped build. Later that evening, Menzies came home and found her sitting on the couch, calmly typing on her laptop. He rushed to her, his voice low and shaky. "Please, Nolisa, I know I was wrong. I didn't see you, but I do now. Can't we fix this? Let's start again." Noliza didn't stop typing. She finished her sentence, saved her work, and closed her laptop slowly. Then she looked up at him, not with anger, but with clear eyes that had already made up their mind. "Do you know what I asked you for all these years?" she said quietly. "Not money, not gifts, just one thing, respect." Menzie looked down ashamed. "And since you couldn't give it," she continued, "I've taken it." Her voice was steady. No yelling, no tears, just truth, the kind that didn't need to be repeated. Menzie tried to speak again, but there was nothing left to say. He knew this wasn't just about one party or one mistake. This was years of being unseen, unheard, and underestimated. And now, Noliza wasn't asking for anything. She was claiming what was always hers. She stood up, picked up her laptop, and walked past him. This time, she didn't ask for a seat at his table. She was already building her own. Months later, Noliza stood on a bright modern stage at a leadership summit filled with some of the most respected names in business. The room was packed with young entrepreneurs, industry experts, and journalists. All eyes were on her. She wasn't introduced as someone's wife or just the co-founder of a growing company. She was introduced as a trailblazer, a CEO, a woman who quietly shook the system and made her mark without shouting. As she walked to the center of the stage, wearing a simple yet elegant outfit, the applause filled the room. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. People leaned in, eager to hear her story, how she had stayed silent for years, only to rise as the hidden leader of one of the most talked about companies in the country. Noliza shared her journey in her usual calm way. She spoke about hard work, late nights, and the importance of believing in yourself even when others don't. She spoke about how silence can be strength and how dignity doesn't always need noise. Her words were honest, simple, and powerful. Then someone from the audience asked, "What moment changed everything for you? What was the turning point?" Noliza smiled. It was a warm, quiet smile, the kind that comes from deep understanding. She looked around the room and said, "The moment my husband told me to stay in the kitchen at his office party, that's when I realized I own the house." The room went completely still, then burst into applause. People stood up. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. That one sentence held so much power. It wasn't just about one moment. It was about years of being told to stay small and finally realizing you were never small to begin with. That quote was shared across social media within hours. It appeared in magazines, news headlines, and motivational posters. "I own the house" became a phrase of strength for women and dreamers everywhere. And as Noliza walked off the stage, she didn't look back. She knew the kitchen was never her limit. It never had been. She had outgrown the corner she was placed in, not by shouting, but by rising, and now the world knew her name. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who's ever been underestimated. Tag a woman who's more powerful than the world realizes. Don't wait for a seat at the table. Build your own. Comment, "I own the house," if you're ready to rise in silence and shine in strength.